Hey, welcome everyone to a special edition of our family support webinar series, Sanfilippo Speak. Today, we're very excited to bring to you our providers and our people of interest who are maybe dipping a toe into the world of horse therapy, therapeutic riding, hippotherapy, equine assisted therapy. We have some great speakers for you today to give you a little bit more background on how that can work well for your clients with Sanfilippo syndrome. So I am here today with Gabby and Kayla, and I'm going to let these two lovely ladies introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with our presentation. Gabby, if you'd like to go first.
Hi, my name is Gabby Newton. I am a certified occupational therapy assistant. I have been a CODA for the past 12 years and have been incorporating hippotherapy for the past 8 years. I am an avid equestrian with about 30 years worth of knowledge in working with equines. We have 4 horses that we use in our program, and then I have 1 personal horse that I have on property. The reason I kind of got into therapy and everything is my brother has special needs. And so I was a care provider when he was younger. And he also used to do hippotherapy. And then as he kind of got older, transitioned to the therapeutic riding aspect. So even 25-ish years later, he is still in the horse world, kind of just like I am. So it's just a big motivation and kind of the reason I got into everything, just seeing how that type of treatment tool can, just brighten and liven everything up with a client.
I'm Kayla Griffiths, and I'm a physical therapist assistant. I've been a physical therapist assistant since 2012, worked in a myriad of different clientele fields, but started working with pediatrics in 2016. Unlike Gabby, I did not grow up in the horse world. She's the one who actually introduced me to hippotherapy and being able to utilize horses in her treatment sessions. And as soon as I found out about it, I was hooked. And from there, that's when we built our program. In regards to Sanfilippo, in July of 2017 is when we first started working with our sweet friend, Miss K, with Sanfilippo syndrome. It started off in the clinic with just PT. A year later, she started with PT/OT co-treats, and then we were able to introduce her to our hippotherapy sessions, to where we've been seeing her pretty much every week for the last 7 to 8 years. And now we see her 2 times a week, and it's exclusively out at the ranch. So we've got a lot of history with her. We've been seeing her again and kind of seeing the progression with her for the last 7 to 8 years. And so we kind of have a wide gamut of what to expect with her, and hopefully we can help you out in that aspect today.
So kind of the beginning parts of everything is the difference between hippotherapy and therapeutic riding. There's a lot of big differences, but the major one is with hippotherapy, you have to be a licensed therapist, whether that's an occupational, physical, or speech therapist. And your overall goal is to improve the function of the client that you're working with. Also hippotherapy, because it is provided by a licensed therapist, it is covered through insurance. And kind of with that, like it is a tool to encourage functional outcomes. So just like you could utilize a swing or a ball, the horse is just a tool. And so one of the things as well is, we're not using the horse for the whole session. We're using it to be able to get a functional outcome and then kind of continue to progress that with doing more functional activities throughout our sessions. We use evidence-based and clinical reasoning. We are kind of through the American Hippotherapy Association. So they offer part 1 and part 2 to kind of assist you with training. And then they also have a bunch of, continuing ed and everything that is, specifically for utilizing hippotherapy in our treatment sessions. For the most part, it is a one-on-one, so 1 client to 1 therapist, or a 2-to-1, so 2 therapists, so a co-treat with OT-PT, OT speech PT, with 1 client. And then another thing with hippotherapy, because it is a tool, they are not in control of the horse. We have team members that are leading the horses, so they are in control of the horse, and the therapist, we are asking them to do different movements and control the horse a specific way to find the best kind of input that we are looking for with our clientele. And then another thing is with hippotherapy, there is a weight limit. So it kind of goes back and forth, kind of depending on the years of American Hippotherapy Association. They're kind of at 20% of the horse's body weight. However, our program, we utilize just 10% of the horse's body weight. And that's also to kind of keep the horses happy and healthy, because, you know, we can't do what we do without the horse. And if we get a sour horse, it makes our sessions a little bit more challenging. So we do kind of advocate for the equine as well. And another thing with hippotherapy, you have to be at least 2 years old to participate with that.
Yeah, one thing I just want to add, the weight limit is in place because most of the kids that you're having on these horses aren't able to stabilize themselves, especially your Sanfilippo kids, right? Because as their condition is progressing, they start losing their core control. And so you're having a kid who's now leaning to one side. Well, if you have a horse who's having kids on them who's leaning to one side for their entire career, it's like carrying a 20-pound backpack on for your entire life. Your body's going to start adapting to those changes. Whereas when you're doing something like therapeutic riding, the rider's supposed to be balanced. The rider's supposed to be able to find their center and be able to get that midline control, you know, and that's what we're looking for with hippotherapy, but most of our friends aren't able to do that. So that's why the weight limit is in place. Because like Gabby said, it's to preserve the equine for as long as possible, because if your horse isn't happy, then you don't have a program, essentially. So, and that's the difference. Another thing too that's different with hippotherapy is that the horses are only allowed to be used for 3 working hours a day, and they can't be used more than 2 hours back to back. Whereas with therapeutic riding, a horse can be used for multiple hours within a day, providing multiple lessons for these kids. And again, the big key is just preservation of that horse so you can maintain the program.
Yes, and you know, either with hippotherapy or therapeutic riding, the horse is a performance horse. And a lot of misconceptions is, you know, when people are like, oh, my horse needs to, you know, go to a different thing, you know, they can't be an adventure or, you know, do the performance that, you know, your typical rider does. They think they can pass it off to, you know, a program that is utilizing either one of these things. And it doesn't really work that way, because we need the horse, it's a performance horse. And like Kayla said, you know, when we have a bunch of unbalanced riders, you know, that horse needs to be in good shape to be able to carry the workload that we're asking it to do.
And we'll get into that later though.
Yes. And so with therapeutic riding or adaptive riding, they are switching it to more adaptive riding because when you think of therapeutic riding, they're thinking therapy. And you think that it's insurance and that kind of stuff. So they're trying to get out of that terminology and go more to adaptive riding. Where adaptive riding is a recreational sport. It is self-pay, and it is taught by a riding instructor. And the riding instructor is teaching a skill to the client where the rider is in control. They could have leaders and sidewalkers. However, the instructor is asking the client to be in control and do different movements with the horse. And typically the instructor, it's in a group setting or a semi-private setting, and the instructor is staying in the middle and just projecting to the group and asking them to do things. They can come, you know, help one-on-one, but for the most part, they want that group session. And then it's, you know, yes, there is benefits of riding the horse as, you know, we all know, but it's more geared towards like the social and recreational side of things. Whereas hippotherapy, we are working on a specific thing for a functional outcome and things like that.
Within the specific practice, whether it's OT, PT, or speech.
Yes.
That's what's driving the session.
And then, you know, with adaptive riding, they also have weight limits. However, it's a little bit greater where it's, you know, 150 for an unbalanced rider and up to 180. And they are typically using typical equipment, which is saddle, stirrups, and reins with every session. With hippotherapy, depending on the therapist's, you know, thoughts for the day or what the client needs, they can incorporate those things. But that's kind of just on a base-to-base situation, whereas your adaptive riding, they are always in a saddle and they will always have stirrups and reins. And then also with adaptive riding, they have to be at least 4 years old to participate.
Yes. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a rundown. A lot of this is also broken up into the AAH page or American Hippotherapy page, which we have links at the end as well. But we can go ahead and move on to the next one. No, I skipped one. Maybe not. I'm on the wrong one, that's fine. Don't mind me over here. So how do you incorporate therapy and equine movement? So equine movement provides organized multi-directional movements that help the client practice moving in correct ways. Right. So the average horse walks 100 steps per minute or up to 3,000 steps in a 30-minute session. What we find is typically our PT and OT sessions are an hour long, right? So at max, we're only on the horse for 30 minutes. But what you'll find is when you're incorporating this as a provider, these kids aren't lasting for 30 minutes because that is 3,000 steps that their little precious bodies don't normally take in a day. And you're asking them to do it in 30 minutes. So typically we're looking out a lot of the times like to see how their bodies are responding, right? For our friend, Miss Kay, there's days where she can sit upright and she only needs a little bit of support underneath her like armpits in order to keep her stabilized. There are other days where she's literally collapsed over on herself and she's not able to sit upright, you know, and if we're to the point where the child cannot sit upright with a moderate amount of assistance, riding and being on the horse and utilizing that movement is not productive for that day. So we're just not going to ride. We're going to go, you know, back to our sessions inside the barn and we're going to be doing something else that is more geared to what she needs for that day, you know, and it's not just for Sanfilippo, that's across the board. You know, if your kid's not responding or if they're too tired, you're not getting the movement out of them that you're wanting, then it's not a tool to be utilized for that day. With that being said too, from a PT side of things, each horse offers its own unique movement patterns based off of their conformation. And the conformation is basically how the horse is built, right? You have to look at different things like what their body length is, what their length from their body to the ground is, how long their stride is. There's a whole bunch of different things that go into looking at a horse. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more later. But the basic takeaway from it is that their movement as they're walking will provide a child's pelvis to do different movements. So the three basic ones are your anterior posterior, where the kid is literally going forward or backwards as the horse is walking. The other one is lateral. So they're going side to side and they're literally, you'll just see them shifting back and forth. And the other movement is rotational. So as you're moving, their hips are literally moving in that rotational movement like you would expect when they're walking. That's the ideal gait that you can get, but you never know what you're going to get with a horse. You can kind of facilitate that with different walking patterns from them, but it's not always guaranteed. And again, we'll get into that with what you're looking for in a horse, but it's really important because if you have a friend like Miss Kay, who's not walking very great, if you can get her forward sitting and facilitate that rotational movement through her hips, it's sending all that neurofeedback up into her brain, which helps maintain the longevity of what she's, you know, what she's doing. And it helps to hopefully keep those neurons firing for as long as possible. On a side note, you know, when it comes to a time where she's going to be in a wheelchair and she's no longer walking at all, again, then she's stretching out her legs, she's getting those more motor neurons firing, and it's phenomenal. Yes, I didn't know if you had anything you want to add.
Yeah, and also, you know, if you know you have a client that is wheelchair bound, this is a great opportunity for them, like Kayla said, to feel the movement of their, you know, their pelvis moving and things like that, where they can't get that in, you know, typical kind of clinical settings.
Yeah.
So we can still utilize the horse even though, you know, the child is non-ambulatory.
Yes. So we kind of go into it a little bit more as far as the different things that help facilitate, like from a therapeutic standpoint, you know, you'll look at their different pace and their patterns, which also affects the movement. You know, the slower you go, you know, they're doing less. The faster you go, the more they're having to engage their core. But you can also move too slow and you're not getting anything out of it, you know, because there's definitely a big sensory component that goes into it too, which is a huge OT side of things. You know, and you can add in small circles, medium circles, large circles, all of those facilitate different things, whether you're trying to engage core, whether you're trying to get their proprioceptive and sensory regulation going. You can add sensory or serpentines, excuse me, and halt walk patterns where you're literally walking the horse, you stop rapidly, and then you start again. So you're really working on that stop, start, and kind of protective response from your kid too.
Yeah, and then also you can incorporate, you know, walking over poles, because that changes the movement as well. It's like a kind of a pause in there as the horse is stepping over. You can utilize hills if you have those around, or even you can make things, you can make like a bridge or things like that, again, to challenge the movement of the horse. And then that facilitates a different challenge for the client as well while they're on top.
Yep.
The next slide. The positioning of the client. You can play around with this kind of all day long. So your typical positioning is your forward sitting, where you're straddling the horse and looking forward, looking through, over their ears. And that's where you're going to get like your vestibular and your proprioceptive, like I said, that pelvic movement. You can also go into a side sitting position, whether you're side sitting with right hip forward, left hip forward, and it also changes which direction you're going in the arena. So if the client is facing like on the outside of the arena, that will facilitate more of an extensor pattern. If they're facing on the inside while you're going around with your circles, that's going to facilitate a more flexor pattern. So you have to kind of be aware of what you're trying to get and utilize that. With Miss K, she is a side sit queen.
Yes.
And we only go one direction for the most part, just the way her body has kind of progressed and where she needs the support. Going one direction in that side sitting position has been the most beneficial for her. Yeah. You can also go into a backward sitting position, and this is where you're going to get a lot more vestibular and proprioceptive input. And then you can also go into like prone over the barrel. So literally like their stomach and everything is like laying over the horse. Again, that's a major vestibular and proprioceptive, and it could back stretch too. And then you can also go into a quadruped position where they're on their hands and knees. And then this is a good core and like upper body strengthening activity, because trying to do that on a dynamic surface is definitely very challenging. And then standing, of course, is like the most challenging, with having to stand up there with the horse's movement and everything.
You want a good team for that one, because that one's we don't do it with everybody. We've done it with maybe one or two clients.
Yes.
We just want to throw it out there. It is possible.
Yeah, it is possible. But yes, you want to have a very good team, very good horse, with all of that, just because they're very unstable up there. And so you everyone's on guard. But when they are able to do it, it's really fun to watch and be a part of. And then also with kind of the positioning, you can use different types of equipment. With our program, we use a saddle pad and what's called a flat surcingle. So there's no handle or hand support on that. And we, just like the way that we can change our positions really quick. And also the client has to engage their body, their core control, and get that sensory feedback kind of right as soon as they're sitting on the horse. You can also do a one-handled or two-handled surcingle. Again, just kind of depends on what your client needs and would work the best for them.
Yeah. I want to say with that too, the reason why we don't use handled surcingles, at least in our program, is because we want the kids to be able to engage their bodies without hanging on, right? If you have a kid who has a lot of forward flexion, you give them something to hang on to, they're not coming back off of that, so we're there to support them as we need, but the end goal for a lot of our friends is to support them less and less. Now, Sanfilippo, that's a little bit different because, as we know, it depends on the day, and we'll get into that a little bit more later as far as the challenges that Sanfilippo specifically has with hippotherapy. But for us, what we have found is the least amount of support that we can give these kids, the better, because it allows their bodies to engage the way that they need to. But there is a picture of a surcingle down at the bottom, just as an example of something if you wanted handles within your program. Just realize that if you're going to have a kid sitting on there and you're trying to get them to transition backwards, they got to have adequate hip flexion to be able to get up and over that surcingle to be able to do it.
And then also the other picture, that is Miss K.
Yes.
When we first started kind of seeing her,
long time ago
with her demonstrating a beautiful quadruped position.
Yes. I will say, going back to that with Sanfilippo specifically, the reason why we have her in side sitting is because she has so much forward trunk collapse. When we can get her into side sitting with her left hip forward, she also has a lot of lateral trunk collapse. You'll see a lot of times that she'll just be kind of hanging out on this way. Well, when we can get her sitting on the horse, it facilitates her being more upright naturally. So I'm having to support her less from the PT side of things, and her body's engaging in that natural movement while she's supported, or while she's supporting herself in that upright posture. Now, again, it depends on the day. Some days it's not that great, but that's just what we found to be able to be the most beneficial and most long lasting for her, because she can tolerate that for about 10 to 15 minutes, which again is close to 1,500 neuro inputs in a day for her. So.
Yes, and then also, along with the positioning, you can do different activities while you're on the horse. You can do rings and cones, puzzles, fine motor, gross motor. You know, you can play basketball, you can play soccer. I mean, really, the imagination can go wild with this. As long as your horses are trained to do all of it, the more you kind of can bring, depending on what you want, you can bring a lot of things into your session, or you can, you know, use the horse as the facilitator and then transition, you know, into your therapy room to be able to continue to work on, you know, what your kind of goals and functional outcomes are for that session.
Yeah. So get creative with it and have fun.
Absolutely.
We can go to the next one. So what challenges does Sanfilippo present to hippotherapy? If you're not familiar with Sanfilippo, you're in the right place. So thank you for looking at the foundation, because they do a lot of wonderful things and they have so many different resources for you. So please dive in and learn as much as you can about this diagnosis. The biggest thing that we have found, obviously, is that it's a progressive diagnosis, right? So your mindset as a provider should be fully understanding that the lack of regression these babes have is progress, right? They're not going to be progressing like other friends where you're like writing your goals out and saying, oh, they're going to progress. You know, no, if they're not regressing, that is a huge win for you. And you need to understand that. If you don't understand that, you don't need to be working with kids with Sanfilippo. I'm sorry to say it, but you're not in the right state of mind in order to give these kids and these families what they need. The other big issue, especially with hippotherapy, is depending on your region and depending on where you're at, these kids have zero body temperature control, right? So in the summers, you have to be monitoring what they're doing so that they're not getting heat stroke and they're not getting overheated. And it's a constant thing, you know, with Miss K, we're only riding in the summer for maybe 10 minutes, depending on the day, but we have cooling cloths, we have fans, we have an air conditioned bathroom. And if it even thinks that if I think that she's getting even a hint of too warm, we pull her from the horse, because I don't need her going into an emergency episode of her being overheated. Now, when it's colder, it's a little bit less of a hassle, but we have heating blankets, you know, we bundle her up, you know, and we do all of the different things. So the cold is not as much of an issue, but it's something that you want to make sure that you're paying attention to if you're trying to start up a program and utilize it with Sanfilippo friends. The other thing that's super important, especially from a PT side of things, is that as things are progressing with their condition, with their diagnosis, your assistance is going to change moment by moment. Yes. There are days where I am barely hanging on to her, and 2 steps later, she's trying to collapse to the ground. And then 2 steps later, she's fine again, because as her brain is undergoing this transition, we don't know what motor neurons are firing. And so you have to be on your toes, and you cannot just leave them to themselves, because it's not going to end up very good for anybody. You cannot let your guard down with these friends at all, and especially when they're on the horse. And so it's highly recommended, at least for your Sanfilippo friends, that you have a sidewalker that's going to be there with you the entire time, so that you can hang on to them. And if something happens, you have extra hands, because the horses are unpredictable. You know, we can train them to the best of our ability, but they are still animals, you know, or if they have an emergency episode, whatever it may be, with these friends specifically, having extra hands is always going to be beneficial, you know. And then also too, from like a therapeutic standpoint, as things are progressing, sometimes it's nice just to have an extra set of hands. So as you're doing stretching, somebody can be distracting them. You know, a lot of times while I'm working on her sweet little ankles, just to make sure that she's not getting, you know, locked into plantar flexion, Gabby's entertaining her, you know, or stretching out her arms. And so we found for her that a co-treat's been super beneficial.
Yes.
So those are the main, like, 4 major points that we have found specifically for Sanfilippo. So we can go to the next one.
The qualifications you need. So you have to be a licensed occupational, physical, or speech therapist. You can also be an assistant, OT assistant, PT assistant. You just have to, you know, have somebody supervising over top of you. That's just the law with our licensing boards and everything. American Hippotherapy Association is not a governing board. However, it is highly, highly recommended that you go through the part 1 and part 2 of their, I guess,
program.
program qualification, I wouldn't say qualifications, but their program, one, so you can get a better understanding of what you're doing, especially if you're coming into this kind of a mediocre horse person.
We're
You
not
won't-
horse person at all.
You want to, kind of be with people that have done this for many, many years, and they can give you the insight and problem solve and talk through you, with that. And then part two, so part one, you kind of complete kind of once you want to start the program.
Yep.
And then after, so many hours or years, it's recommended then to go back into the part two.
Yep.
Well, you'll get a little bit more like hands-on treatment, problem solving with different clinical scenarios and things like that.
Yeah. In part one, they'll also tell you about conformation of the horse. They'll tell you what you're looking for in a horse, and how to care for the horse, because what they found when they were developing this program is that a lot of people were like, oh, horses in therapy, let's go. And they weren't including like how to care for the horse, because like we said at the beginning, and we'll reiterate this all the time, if you're not taking care of the horse that's in your program, you're not going to have a program. And that's paramount, Sanfilippo, no Sanfilippo, whatever it is, if you're not taking care of your horses, they're not going to be serving the purpose that you need them for, and they're not going to have a fulfilling life as well. So part one really kind of incorporates that a little bit as well. So not only are you learning about what you can do with your clients, but you're learning how to make sure that the major part of your program is sustained as well.
Yes, and then also be comfortable being uncomfortable. Kind of depending on your region and what your climate is. For us, we are outside. We don't have a covered arena or anything. So we are doing all of our sessions outside. So whether it's, 20 degrees outside at 9 o'clock in the morning, or, close
In the
to
90s.
in the 90s, we do have a cutoff limit,
Yep.
with our clients, especially in the summers. So if it hits 95 or we get into the triple digits, we do not utilize the horse, during that session. It's just not beneficial for the client. Sanfilippo, especially, with like that temperature regulation, like Kayla was mentioning. And also it's just not fun for the horse either.
It's
so
miserable for everybody.
It's miserable for everybody. So we just, kind of have a barn day, when those times come around. But along with that, we're walking on sand, we're walking on hills, we're walking on grass, it's a lot of work on your body, especially with Sanfilippo, and as they are progressing with their diagnosis. We've been seeing Kay for 7 or 8 years, and she used to sit up on the horse completely independent, and she would just kind of hang out. We would play music and everything, and now, like Kayla said, depending on her day and minute, is whether she's min assist or max assist. So it is a lot of body twerking for ourselves as well. So you do kind of want to have some physical fitness as well, just because you want to be able to last, and your mechanics need to work as well, because you don't want to over push yourself,
Right.
and then be out for a few weeks, and then that, you're starting kind of back at square one. So the more you can, provide for our clients, on a week-to-week basis, the better progress, and everything you're going to have.
For an example, with Miss K, I'm just going to turn this. I'm literally walking like this for 15 minutes with my hand underneath her armpit, my body rotated, and walking forward and sideways for 15 minutes. And if you want to talk about isometrics, holy baby isometrics. So it's one of those things where you have to make sure that you're taking care of your body as well, but it's very, very physical, like Gabby said. And if you're not prepared to do that, and especially with your Sanfilippo kids, then you might need to reevaluate what you're looking into, because it's not fair to them if you can't support them on the horse. And that's the other thing too with Sanfilippo. If you need to pull them off the horse, you need to pull them off the horse, but you should be able to scoop that babe up and bring them down.
Yes.
With adults, they'll be like, dump them in the sand, it's fine. Not with Sanfilippo. You're not going to be doing that. You will carry the child, and at least get them to safety, in the event that something does happen.
Yeah.
And they talk about that in level 1 courses and things along those lines too, but like, the kids' safety is paramount. So you need to make sure that your mechanics are good enough to be able to keep them safe, especially if you're just doing this as a single therapist. Because as a single therapist, you are in charge of that session. If you have to pull a kid off the horse, it is your job, not the volunteers.
Yes.
You are responsible for that child. So again, you just have to keep all of that in mind if this is an avenue that you're looking to go down.
Yes. And then also, like we kind of said with the horse comes first.
Yeah.
Because we can't utilize this wonderful treatment tool without them. So if the horse is having a day, then that is a day. Like all humans. We all have days where we're like, oh, I don't really want to do that. Well, horses can say that too, and you have to respect that, because then you can put yourself in a negative and safety situation that a horse is like an elephant, they don't forget. So you have to also remember that is, safety across the board for the horse, for the client, for the therapist, for your leader, your sidewalkers, everyone. So if, having a very well trained staff leader, so they can kind of tell you like, oh,
Not today.
not today. They're, coming out of their stall, lame, or they're coming out of their stall with like a tail in the air, and any little sound or movement is sending them into a tailspin. Like that is just not what you want to do. So you have to evaluate that during your sessions as well. And like I said, this is a tool. This is not the end all. Like you have to be able to do other things in your session outside of just utilizing the horse.
Yeah, so your session shouldn't have to rely on the movement of the horse. The movement of the horse should complement your session. And that's what we tell a lot of our families too. We're like, yes, we're outside. Yes, we're at the barn. Yes, this is great. We will not ride every session. This is not a riding lesson. It is a PT, OT, or speech therapy session. They just get the benefit of this wonderful tool. So you need to be very clear with that with your parents too, because sometimes, these parents don't have any idea of what's going on. So you need to be educating them on what this is, because you'll have parents who show up and you can talk to them till you're blue in the face about what the session is. And they'll show up and they'll say, why wasn't my kid on the horse the entire time? Why aren't you using saddles and reins? And we're like, therapy. This is a therapy session, and if the families aren't vibing with that, and that's okay, you can just recommend other therapy programs that are out there for them. But you will find yourself reiterating yourself all the time, especially as you're getting yourself set up.
Yes, and using the correct verbiage with everything. This is hippotherapy. This is not horse therapy. This is not therapeutic riding or adaptive riding. This is hippotherapy. This is a treatment tool that we get to utilize. And that's why we are a licensed therapist, to be able to do this, so that we can, decide, yes, this is a good fit for your child, or no, this is not a good fit. And that happens as well too. When we have some clients that come out here that's like, no, this is not
applicable.
A clinic, a traditional clinical setting would be more beneficial than what we can provide out here. So knowing your boundaries as well with that.
And one thing, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but terminology is a big thing. And so when you're trying to promote this, the AHA is saying, don't say that you're having a hippotherapy session. It's still a PT session that utilizes hippotherapy. So, and we get into that, and AHA is great with their their verbiage and all the things. So, but again, we'll get into that later. So just be careful with how you are presenting it, like Gabby was saying. So, but we can move on to the next one. What do we look for in a horse? We've been kind of touching on this for the entire time. Your first consideration is, are you establishing your own barn, or are you connecting with a local resource, right? A lot of hippotherapy utilizing clinics across the United States are already part of an adaptive riding program, right? So the program has, the adaptive riding program has already been built. It's already up on the ground. And then these therapists are coming in saying, hey, can we utilize some of your horses to provide the hippotherapy as a tool? So if that's what you have, then great, and Gabby can kind of get into that a little bit as well. If you are building your own program, that's a whole nother slew of things. So with the local therapeutic riding programs, if that's something that's accessible to you, they will already have horses, and they're already going to have a barn manager who can let you know what each of the horses' movement patterns are and what their tolerance levels are. Because you might have a horse that's great for therapeutic riding, that's not going to be great for hippotherapy, and is that therapeutic riding horse doing 10 lessons in a day? Well, they're certainly not going to be doing hippotherapy then, because you have to consider those different guidelines for each horse, and you might have a barn that only has 5 horses. You might have a barn that has 20 horses, and it also depends on your kid, right? Because if you have 10 other kids who are running, screaming around, it might not be conducive to your lesson. So there's a lot of things, and level 1's going to go into that a lot about what to look for and how to respect the barn managers and things along those lines. Because that's a whole different kind of classification of circumstances that you want to look into. For Gabby and I, we built the program. So it's a little bit different. That's actually, before we get into that, the other consideration, we had mentioned it before, but again, you can only utilize a horse for 3 hours out of a day. And even if that means that you have put the equipment on the horse and they're staying in their stall, their time clock starts the moment that their equipment's on. Think about it like a service dog. If the service dog's vest is on, it is working. And whether it's with its handler or not, it is working. And that's the same concept with horses too. So you got to keep that in mind. So
Yes, and like Kayla had mentioned, we have built ours from the ground. So it's been fun.
trials and errors.
That's yes. With kind of finding the right horse, and you have to understand and know your own limits as far as your financial abilities. The horse world is crazy nowadays. So be prepared to spend some money, unfortunately. And like kind of like we said earlier, like these are performance horses.
Yes.
You know, you don't want to grab, oh, there's, you know, Bucko sitting in the field, he's 20 something years old, hasn't been ridden in 10 years, he's free. I was like, well, that, you know, again, performance horse, they are still working. Even though our program, we only walk with our clients, it is still a lot on their body and also on their mental and emotional state as well. Because we have a lot of different clientele coming in with all kinds of different needs, and those horses are so intuitive, they pick up on all of that. So if we have a lot of, you know, kind of higher energy, you know, clients, those horses, they feel that. So you also want to balance your clientele as best you can. Obviously, within your limits of your horses available, you know, we have 6 horses in our program. So we really have to, you know, figure out how many, you know, clients we can see in a day, and then, you know, who can match up with which horse. So there's a lot going into it. But in regards to like finding a horse, I prefer an age range of like 10 to like 16 years old, where they, you know, they kind of have some training underneath of them, you know, they're completely grown, and all of those kinds of things. Conformation wise, you know, not making, you know, kind of looking at their body as a whole, making sure like, you know, obviously they don't have a broken leg or they're lame or things like that. You know, we can try our best to work with them, because you have to think, you know, if you're watching the horse walk and they have like a gip, well, that's going to translate into our clients. And so they're gonna feel that
Every
movement. So, you know, do your best to, you know, look at the horse, ride the horse, you know, not like ride as in like ride like you would like your typical riding. Get on the horse and feel the movement. You know, what kind of movement are they providing to you? Are we getting rotation? Are we getting more lateral? Are we getting more AP? And things like that. So, you know, really kind of, you know, turn your therapy brain on and just kind of be in the moment with the horse so you can feel what the horse is giving you. And it's best to have a variety of horses like in your program that have the different types of movements, because one might work great for one kid, one might not work for the other. So just being mindful of that.
We have a list that we go through. It's about an hour and a half that we put each horse through that we're looking at even considering into the program. So if it's something that you're looking for, we'd be happy to send that to you, but we'll literally go out if we're looking at a horse and run through every single thing just to make sure that the horse is responding in a way that is something that we can work with. Because obviously they're not going to be perfect right away, but if their responses is like, oh my gosh, you know, and then the next time that's a little bit less reactive, then you know that's a horse that you can work with versus someone that's going to be dragging you across the arena, because the horse's safety, your safety, and especially the client's safety is paramount. So just let us know, because we could talk about this for hours on it, but we'll send you a list. You know, we'd be happy to talk to you if it's something that you're looking for, because it definitely took several experiences for us to kind of really refine the list of what we look for. You know, and then kind of getting into that for Sanfilippo specific, if you are building your program, and even if you're leasing a horse out and utilizing it that way for Sanfilippo with friends, the horse has to tolerate rocking and controlled kicking and sudden trunk collapses, right? Like with Miss K, there's days where her legs are just bouncing like this, you know, she's not intentionally like kicking the horse, but it's a lot of flapping and extra movement on the side of the horse. And if you have a horse that's a little bit jumpy and like what the Sam's going on, they're going to start sidestepping, and it's not going to be safe for anybody. And they also have to tolerate close quarter walking. That's one thing maybe we didn't get into a whole lot, but like you'll have someone who's leading the horse, right? And as a therapist, I'm right up next to the horse, and most of the time my body is bumping up against that horse. So if you have a horse that doesn't tolerate touching on their hindquarters and on their stomachs and things like that at a constant basis, it's not going to be good for anybody,
Yeah.
you know, and then there's times when there's somebody else on the opposite side too. So that's a lot of close walking for a horse, and not every horse can handle. I mean, think about your typical person. There's people who like being buddy, and there's people who are like, you need to stay 10 feet away. Horses are the exact same way. And then you add the stress of having a kid who has all these things going on. You're asking a lot of them. So for Sanfilippo specifically, really look at these 2 bullet points and make sure that the horse is solid, not on a one-time basis, but 99% of the time, right? Because that 1% time unit, they're still animals, right?
Yes.
But the majority of the time, they should be okay with it.
And I'd also say, you know, also with a Sanfilippo
Yeah.
specific is the size of the horse.
Yes.
You don't want to be holding a child up over your head. Like
Perfect.
Miss K, where, you know, she fluctuates from meniscus to maxillus. Well, that maxillus can take 5+ minutes for her to then, you know, regain and go back into that meniscus.
Yeah.
So again, your body mechanics make a difference as well. So finding a equine that is easily where you can kind of be in more support range where you're not over exceeding your limits,
Right.
just to keep the child safe. So we have a little pony named Miss Penny, and she's about 14 hands. So she's definitely on the shorter side. So it's a lot easier for us to have Kay there and, you know, provide support without compromising our body mechanics.
Yes.
So that is something to like take into consideration as well. Like I said, as they're kind of progressing, they're going to need more support. So, you know, Miss K used to ride Mr. Gus, who was about 15 hands.
Yep.
But now, like she needs that extra support. She needs to be on something smaller, so that we can provide all of the assistance to her.
And also Mr. Gus was not happy with all of her kicking.
Yeah.
So we had to pay attention to that as well, because she was kicking and he wasn't happy. And we're like, okay, we need another plan here.
Yes.
So
and so, yeah, like I said, the best way, you know, we're limited on our horses, you know, I wish we had 20 horses in our program. One day we will. But you know, taking that into consideration. So yeah, Mr. Gus doesn't like kicking. So we have to then kind of think about what our clientele is and put him with a client that doesn't kick as much, you know, like with Miss K, Penny, she's like, okay, whatever.
Yep.
Kind of goes with the flow.
Yes. So we can go to the next one. So how do you bill and communicate this tool to insurance? So hippotherapy is considered a tool and is therefore not a billable CPT code. They do not want you even like trying to bill the CPT code because it's going to get a lot of kickback.
Yes.
Right. So you're going to bill according to your standard clinical practices for a client receiving PT, OT, or speech treatment when utilizing other tools such as a swing, a ball, dynamic surface. In our program, like for PT services, it is therapeutic exercises. Thank you. For OT, it's therapeutic activities. Right, but the link below shows you CPT code suggestions per AHA. It's your typical neuromuscular feedback. It's your gait training. You know, they've got specific ones for PT, OT, and even for you speechies out there. They've got them for you as well for what they recommend. And like we were mentioning earlier, the AHA has this wonderful link for terminology that they recommend that you use in your documentation to make sure that you're not getting kickbacks, right? So you're not going to say the kid was riding the horse. No, you're saying utilizing dynamic equine movement to facilitate blah, 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 you know, and they've got verbiage in there to make it a therapeutic tool with what you're doing with the horse. And you can get very specific with what you're doing. For Sanfilippo, with Miss K, patient was inside sitting for 10 minutes to facilitate upright trunk posture and control, utilizing large dynamic circles, you know, things along those lines, just to show that what you're doing is legitimately therapeutic and they're not just along for the ride.
Yes.
But that terminology is all in there, you know, go based off of what your practice acts are within your state versus what your practice acts are for the clinic that you're working with. But these are very, very good guidelines. Just do not say riding the horse because it's not, riding horses are not therapeutic. So.
Yes. And then also with your plans of cares, you just need to make sure that is listed in one of what your interventions. Is to, you know, utilizing hippotherapy. And then also you need to double check your insurances.
Yes.
There are some insurances that even though hippotherapy is an evidence-based practice, they're saying it's
you can't do it
experimental. So make sure you double check your clients, their insurance. You don't want to say, oh yes, we can do this, and then be like, oh, your insurance does not allow it because they feel like it's experimental. So definitely abide by that. So that way we're not, you know, putting these parents in a situation where they have to pay out of pocket
Right.
to cover these sessions, and things like that.
Because even though if it's not billed as CPT code, it's still as a modality, you know, and that's, they're calling it a modality. The AHA doesn't like modalities, but that's what insurance considers it. So like Gabby said, just look and make sure it's not clicked into there, so you're not writing it into your plan of cares and then getting kicked back later.
Yes.
So we can go to the next one. So resources and references. So the AHA is phenomenal with all of their references. This specific link is for frequently asked questions that providers have. And so if we didn't cover it in our talk here today, I can almost guarantee you that you're going to find it in under their FAQs. And please note that the right side of the page has quick links. So they'll talk about when there's the level 1 course, when there's a level 2 course, how do you find providers, you know, and pretty much anything else that you might want and need. I think the providers are just the ones who've gone through the actual certification though, correct?
Yes, so to like find a therapist on their site is therapists that have gone through level 1 or level 2, then also pay to get onto the page. So if you go on their page and you might find somebody in your region and you want to try to connect with them and you know, kind of see what they're doing, how they got set up and things like that, that's a really good resource as well.
Yeah. Just know that not everybody who are practitioners are going to be on that page.
Yes.
They're just, there's kind of like the APTA, you know, or other forms. It's kind of a pay to play sort of a deal in order to be listed on there. So if you're not finding anybody in your region, that doesn't mean there's nobody there. It's just they might not be on the page. So just kind of branch out and see if you can find anybody who's doing that. And also just for you guys, if you're trying to build up the program, if you're trying to talk to your other clinicians or whatever, if you want the AHA definition of hippotherapy, we've also provided that link. Basically, anything you want to know is under the AHA.
Yeah.
They're brilliant with all of their information. And of course, for references, the source single picture is not ours, so I have to put where we got it from.
Yes, and then also, you know, if you guys, you know, are interested in kind of starting this, you know, reaching out to your doctors,
Yes.
your pediatricians, you know, those kinds of things, you know, start having a collaboration with them because they're going to give you the referrals and things like that. And with our program, we do have the doctor sign off that they are receiving this, even though it is, you know, still under OTPT and speech. We still want to make sure the doctor is in the loop of, you know, what's going on if, you know, our clients aren't seen but once a year. We want to know, you know, the doctor know like that
This is what we're doing.
this is what we're utilizing for our treatments.
And it's more of a safeguard for your safety, right? Because again, the kids are on the horse and anything can happen. So if the doctor's like, yep, this is great. Like your Down syndrome kids, they have to see the doctor because, you know, they're with C1, C2, you have to make sure that they're cleared.
Yes.
Sanfilippo is another one where it's not required, but I would definitely recommend that their entire care team is on board. SK will see a neurologist and sometimes she'll get Botox injections, you know, and you have to kind of mitigate that with your sessions as well. Because of Botox day, well, we're probably not going to have her forward sitting on the horse on a Botox day because their body needs to adapt to it. So the more you can collaborate with your doctors and the specialists that are in your area who are referring these kids to you, the better it's going to be for every outcome. So yeah, I think that might be the end of our deal. So
I do think that is the end of the presentation, and you guys did a fantastic job. I know I learned a lot from this today, and I'm sure there are plenty more. I'm sure there are plenty more questions out there that anyone watching this is going to have. So if you have any questions about anything that you heard today, feel free to email us. Our email is here, contact@curesanfilippofoundation.org, and we'd be happy to get you in touch with Kayla and Gabby if you are really ready to start your hippotherapy program. If you want to start treating children with Sanfilippo, you know, we're happy to get you guys in touch. So are there any last thoughts from the two of you? Any last imparting wisdom that you want to share with anyone listening?
Okay, I'm just gonna say, as hard as it is, and as long as the days are, you know, and as challenging as it gets sometimes, that this is probably one of the most rewarding settings of therapy I've ever been a part of. You know, it's completely different than working in a clinic. You're outside, you're in nature, you're working with these animals, and you're able to get these kids out of a clinical setting. Because especially with these babes with Sanfilippo syndrome, they are seeing doctor after doctor after doctor, and it's white walls around them, you know, and whether or not they're present with what's going on, most of the time when we have Miss K out here, her sweet little smile it lights up the world as soon as she sees Miss Penny. You know, sometimes she's like grumpus with Miss Penny, you know, sometimes Penny's like, they have this little relationship that's going on, but you're able to see these reactions and these responses and these connections that these babes are making that they wouldn't get in a typical clinical setting. And it's phenomenal to see, and we just absolutely love it, on all accounts.
And yeah, off of that note, Miss Kayla was gone for a few weeks and she hadn't seen Miss Kay. And when she did come back, Miss Kay's smile, she was so excited to
Yes.
see Miss Kayla. And I was like, I felt like chopped liver. But I did get a little smile, but
Yes.
like she knows, like
Yes.
she loves being out here with us and with the horses. And like Kayla said, it's, you know, you're in nature.
Yep.
What's not to love about just the fresh outdoors, you know, the sounds and everything that comes around, bugs, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But it's just a very unique and rewarding tool that we get to utilize with our kids with Sanfilippo and, you know, all diagnoses across the board.
Yeah.
So we really just love what we do and what we can provide for them.
I have to add one more little PT side note because I didn't do it and it's just screaming in the back of my mind. As a PT provider, if you are working with a child with Sanfilippo, work their Achilles tendons, work their like gastrocnemiuses. I have been working with Kay for 8 years and she is still ambulatory and her feet are relatively neutral and we are working on it on a weekly basis. So as a PT, it has to be one of your primary treatment areas, and I will go to my grave on that one. Oh, I can't believe I didn't say it before. So anyways, that's my little PT spiel with Sanfilippo. So appreciate your guys' time. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you.